757th contact Thursday, October 29, 2020, 23.44 hours. This is an unofficial, unauthorized translation and may contain errors. Death threats and other gases. Myers 1981 UFO and stealth fighter photos taken at Groom Lake, the supreme value of silence.
Edward, greetings, dear friend.
Greetings also, my friend, and welcome to
What we are talking about today, Edward, again requires the attention of recalling and writing down or recalling and recording, because our last conversation you recalled was that of September 28th.
Yes, I know that. Unfortunately, my extensive work has long since made it impossible to retrieve and write down all the conversations, so only those that are important are considered. We have always done this, but for some time now the whole thing has had to be further restricted. As a result, many conversations have also not been retrieved and written down during the last 2 years. If you look at the list here in the computer, there are 757 recorded reports of conversations so far with today's conversation, which I will add here right now so it looks like this now, which I will add here when I write down the report when I call up today's conversation. The 17th volume is in print and ready for sale from spring next year, and the 18th volume is in control circulation and will probably also be in print next year. Since Monday, January 28, 1975, until Thursday, October 29, 2020, there have been 2,173 personal and 1,541 telepathic contacts with extraterrestrials from the pledges in the Ankar universe and from their Federation members on a purely missionary basis, and these contacts are still continuing. From 757 contacts, written contact reports exist, summarized in 17 blocks of about 500 A4 pages each, partly provided with contemporary documents, newspaper clippings etc., as proof of proven, fulfilled predictions and events etc. A great number of purely private visits, during which only private conversations are conducted, are not included in the purely mission-related official contact reports.
The data you mentioned here are also in accordance with our records.
That must be the case. But look here, our resident Michael put this on my computer. I have been attacked 23 times, but the last time Daniel could have been hit if the bullet had not bounced off a small tree trunk. But now, look at this. Some lunatic in the USA has also been threatening to blow out Michael Horn's lifeline for some time, and that for about 2 years or so, as Michael says.
This is unfortunate, and he should be careful, because people who make such threats are sneaky, and they act from ambush, as you know from your own experience. Greet him, and give him my advice to be careful. For the human beings who make such threats are unpredictable and act hatefully and usually from ambush.
Yes, I have also had experience with this, because all 23 times they were ambushed from a greater distance, but I was always lucky and was only injured once. That was at Ashoka Ashram in India, in Mehrauli. At that time there was a police report about it because the Swami reported the incident to the police. I myself also reported the first attempt on my life to the police in Hinwil, when someone tried to shoot me through the window, but there was only a hole in the window pane and the bullet went right past my head and into the ceiling. Although the matter was taken to the governor, he was obviously only amused about it, so nothing was done. Not even a police report was made. Therefore, I gave up reporting any further attacks to the police. But then Silvana reported an incident when I was shot at in Saland, when we came from Wetsikon and also saw the shooter. The bullet bounced off the windscreen of the car, but it was so damaged that it had to be replaced. This indicator also fell flat and was made ridiculous, because everything was attributed to a stone chip, which must have been thrown up by a passing car, period. However, there was no other car on the road, but the police in Pfafikon stuck to their false assertion and consequently not even a police report was made. So no attack has also been reported to the police since then. What's the point if everything is just made ridiculous, even when witnesses can confirm everything?
I am aware of this, but I cannot understand such behavior by the police and a governor, also this one, which is directed against Michael Horn. It is unquestionable why various people act in this way and even consider murder, namely because the truth should be suppressed, concealed and not come out in public. And this truth I see in our existence, as well as in your important teaching of truth, teaching of the energy of creation, teaching of life. Firstly, in your long-lasting course of spiritual teaching with almost 300 teaching letters, and secondly in your numerous multi-thematic books and writings. These, however, are only these two aspects, for the third is also fought, even more strongly, by your predictions, which you have been trying to publish in public media for about 75 years. But you will not be allowed to make it public, because the whole thing reveals in the first place everything that is destroyed, annihilated and exterminated by the unrestrained growing overpopulation. Then, in the second place, in the front line of the disaster, come all the branches of the economy, which do everything in the foreground as a result of their greedy pursuit of profit and which unscrupulously and irresponsibly affect the planet, its nature, fauna and flora, all ecosystems, and the destruction of the climate, also the atmosphere, in order to satisfy the countless vital, but often unnecessary needs of the irresponsibly managed overpopulation. But this, with this threatening behavior against Michael Horn, is pathetic.
The whole thing is more than just primitive, stupid, simple-minded and intelligent, so there is probably nothing more to be said. But what interests me is this: what do you know about the second wave of the corona epidemic in Europe and the world as a whole, which is now making a correct impact and will not be stopped for the time being? Switzerland is particularly hard hit, as are all the European countries that thought they had survived the epidemic, such as Italy and Spain. But now Germany, France and England as well as Austria, Poland and the Czech Republic, etc. Then also Brazil and South America will be affected. Israel will also be severely affected once again, and if I recall the correct forecasts from 1947, which I called up again a few days ago, then since the official announcement of the epidemic at the end of December 2019 in Wuhan, China, although it is true that the epidemic began at the beginning of 2019 and had already claimed many lives by the end of the year without this being recognized, by the end of next November there will be over 60 million people infected and around 1.5 million corona deaths worldwide. In the USA alone, the epidemic disaster will continue for a long time to come, and by the end of next November, because nothing is being done about the epidemic, it will have claimed well over 255,000 lives, for which the unteachable and pathologically power-hungry and stupid idiot President Trump alone will be to blame. Brazil is also growing rapidly, with deaths by the end of November expected to be around 170,000. In India around 135,000 and in Mexico around 103,000. Europe will also have many corona deaths by the end of November, with Germany at around 15,000, France and England at around 50,000 each, Austria at around 2,500 and Switzerland at around 4,000.
All around, and here I am talking about all the states of the earth. All those responsible for states and authorities are not in any way ordering, enforcing and carrying out everything that needs to be done to not only contain the corona epidemic, which is raging as a pandemic, but to put an end to it. A further mutation of the virus will also occur in the coming weeks. So, as you say, by the end of next November the disease will have killed around 1.5 million people, because all those in positions of government and public authority are incapable of doing their jobs and do not know what they should be doing. Equally totally irresponsible are all conspiracy theorists and their followers, all other negators, know-it-alls and pathologically stupid people who do not use their reason and common sense to see and face the truth of the danger of the disease and the situation, if I may use your own words.
My question: to what extent all over the world the rulers and authorities will take and enforce the correct measures to prevent the worst from happening, is already answered by your answer. Then all the stupid idiots of the people, the negators as well as the rulers and the authorities of the peoples, as well as all those who deny the plague, are absolutely stupid, as well as all those who follow the mad conspiracy theorists as blind believers, who further the disaster and should also be put behind bars, as well as those who shout in their stupidity and irrationality and demand the observance of false basic rights at the expense of the health and death of many human beings. But when they themselves are hit by the plague, these demorers are the first to cry shamefully for help, healing and forgiveness for their misunderstanding in their belief in God. But that doesn't help them either, because many of them will eventually be struck by the disease and die themselves, because their imaginary God cannot help them either, whom they are begging senselessly. But to talk about this any further would be to carry water into the Rhine. What we need to talk about, however, is a question asked by these two persons who have been trying for years to prove scientifically that my photos and 8mm films are not fakes and the beam ships are not models etc., but rather reality. With regard to the fir tree near the Hofhalde above Wetzikon, we know that it was a projection and that in reality it stood about 25 meters below the place where I could take the photos and the 8mm film. But the film is just as lost without a trace as those of the Bachtel divided by only, one from the Sade leg, one from Maywinkel by jet, from Winkelriot in Wetzikon and one from Bergrumliken. But now it's about what I asked you. Namely that you were asked what happened to the other fir trees, especially the one outside Hinwil. I should also know the name of the place, and I also don't remember the name of the place or how I got there, because your daughter Samjais often took me to places where I had to carry my moped to take pictures.
Yes, it was like that. My daughter confirmed it to me. But, as she explained, it was inevitable because there were often people in the area where you had to do your filming and photography work. She also gave me the necessary information and answers to your questions. First of all, you had to carry out your filming and picture taking only in places and under circumstances that had been previously selected by two of our experts in special landscaping to guarantee certain backgrounds, which left no doubt that any fakes could have been made by hanging up small or larger beam ship models. The fact that you would be accused of forgery, fraud and charlatanism was researched by us on the spot, so that for all the photographs, special landscapes were chosen where my daughter had to take you. The routes to these places were sometimes very arduous and difficult for you to drive and walk, but the predetermined places had to be, because it was also determined with foresight that the places and their exact locations would later be checked and measured by various specialists from various organizations, filmmakers, scientists and secret services, and strictly dissected, researched and examined by means of manufactured object models etc. As for the projections of various trees, which my daughter Samjais projected from different locations to other places, the reason was that these projections often had to be abruptly resolved when, despite all the caution, people appeared and,
which unfortunately was often the case despite all caution, as Sam Jace made the projection and her beam ships suddenly disappear.
Yes, she also said that. But the projections were also chosen for the reason that from the beam ships a strong insulation would have destroyed the trees, and such action would be contrary to our directives and is therefore not allowed, because they tell us that we have to protect all genera and species of life forms and only take defensive action against them when there is an effective need to do so. However, such a necessity never existed in the film and image project work, and therefore projections were made.
I can understand that, but you use a term to explain a destruction of trees, which I actually only know from physics and which is not to be explained as simple radiation. Insulation is the term I use, and I don't understand what insulation has to do with radiation in relation to the beam ships. If you can please explain this to me in simple words, because with the best will in the world I can't make any sense of it, because the beam ships is not a sun and is also not visible like a sun and does not radiate heat.
So you know what insulation means, how this term is used in physics, and…
Yes, of course I know that, because I am also interested in physical aspects, so I also know that insulation actually means that something is exposed to and hit by strong solar radiation, like Earth or any other planet in the Sol system, but also in all galaxies with other suns and their systems. Insolation in astronomy simply means the radiation of the sun on the Earth, the moon and all celestial bodies in the Sol system. Furthermore, I learned from your father Sfirth that insolation also refers to dermatology and in medicine to the fact that the hot sun radiation affects the skin and causes sunstroke and sunburn. So that, dear friend, is something I can understand with my little martyred brain, but what it has to do with the radiation from the beam ships, I can only understand effectively like a poor ignorant maniac standing in front of 7 Bohemian forests and hoping that you will explain the whole thing so that I can enter these forests, find the solution and be amazed.
Of course, you can't know that if nothing has been explained to you, but I can explain the whole of the insulation with our flying apparatus in a few words. It is correct what you say, because the radiation of our flying apparatus is a heat radiation similar to sunlight, which is generated at certain moments and has a dangerous and destructive effect on everything. If an aircraft comes too close or even directly in contact with any living being. However, since you have not been enlightened in this respect, you also cannot know that several of our flying apparatus, such as the one of my daughter Sam Jace at that time, were necessarily still radiating heat. This means that the flying apparatus we were using in the air 40 years ago was equipped with radiant heaters on its outer hulls, which generated a temperature of 276 degrees Celsius. This was a precautionary measure which neutralized and incinerated all the toxic gases in the finest aggregate states floating in the Earth's atmosphere, which are also present today and will continue to be present in the future, around our flying apparatus, so that they could not adhere to the outer hulls and pose a health hazard to us if they were to come loose again in our hangars and we inhaled them. That these deposits did indeed occur, and will also continue to occur in the future, on all existing materials etc., with which the human beings then come into contact again and are immune damaged, has been proven beyond doubt by our physical forces. However, the entire earthly physics and medicine have no idea of this, just as they also have no technical possibilities whatsoever to detect and analyze all these fine gas aggregate states and their poisonous danger in the atmosphere, which have an immune-damaging and disease-promoting effect on life forms, especially the human beings. The various exhaust gases and toxins which enter the Earth's atmosphere are transformed in the atmosphere into various new ultrafine gas aggregate states which are still completely unknown to terrestrial physics research, just as this is the case with toxins which are released by the entire terrestrial agricultural sector, chemical industry, factories of all kinds, bioresource extraction and private use etc., which gas into ultrafine poisonous gas aggregate states and impregnate the atmosphere harmful to the health of all life forms. This is, however, as I mentioned before, despite all previous and far-reaching knowledge of the entire earthly physics, still absolutely unknown, just as it also lacks all technical and other possibilities to be able to make determinations, gain knowledge and carry out analyses in the finest material area of gaseous states of aggregation.
This is a steep one, but Sfeth, your father, already spoke of this when he taught me that gas as matter actually corresponds to an unshaped invisible mass of a non-solid and non-liquid state, which can only be determined in the atmosphere in coarser or denser forms by terrestrial physics research, but not in the very finest states of matter, which, as he also explained, are deposited everywhere and also have an immunodefining effect on life forms and thus also cause illness. He also taught me that poisons of all kinds, including all poisons released into nature as pesticides and growth promoters, poison not only the human beings themselves but also the entire fauna and flora, and that these are harmful to health. But he also explained that gases are produced from all these poisons. The poisons, which are dissolved by moisture after they are released and penetrate into the plants and poison them, whereby the human beings then also become poisoned and ill again, etc., are also partially gasified, whereby these new gases that are created mix with other toxin excretions and new gas aggregate states, whereby changes are made again and thus, depending on their type, new and even very fine aggregate states are created, which are integrated into the atmosphere and are immunodeficient and harmful to health. But as Sfeth said, like you too, our present physics and physics research is not yet, and not for a long time until the distant future, able to even perceive these fine gas forms. Our physics must be glad that it can detect, analyze and name the gases known to it so far, such as the flammable, explosive, liquid, poisonous, odorous and odorless gases, as exhaust gases of various kinds, such as exhaust gas and LPG, but also other gases such as corrosive gas, acetylene gas or hydrogen gas, diesel gas, biogas, combustion gas, lignite gas, fuel gas, butane gas, chlorine gas, landfill gas, distillation gas, compressed gas, noble gas, natural gas, digester gas, long-distance gas, cylinder gas, liquid gas, generator gas, odorous gas, blast furnace gas, poisonous gas, mine gas, heating gas, wood gas, inert gas, war gas, sewer gas, air conditioning gas, oxy-hydrogen gas, laughing gas, illuminating gas, air gas, methane gas, more gas, natural gas, nerve gas, oil gas, propane gas, flue gas, clean gas, irritant gas, raw gas, harmful gas, shale gas, protective gas, carbonization gas, mustard gas, town gas, swamp gas, synthesis gas, tear gas, propellant gas, greenhouse gases, combustion gas, water gas, wind gas. The gases themselves are usually invisible, but nevertheless every gas has a color, even if it is hardly visible, but still visible with suitable equipment, which is, as far as I know, also unknown to our bright and smart heads of physics, who are dealing with this much more far-reaching matter than they can imagine. They have no idea, let alone any knowledge, of this either. and indeed they would be amazed if they could see even a part of all that Sfirth has shown me with your technical possibilities and showed me what will remain hidden to us earthlings with all our poor means in the world of physics for centuries to come. What I say again, that does not really belong to what you want to explain. Excuse me, because I am simply always overwhelmed by explanations.
Yes, I know that. But it is a good thing, because you are used to adding remarks in order to present a matter in the best possible way, which makes it possible to understand the facts clearly. And this is not the case with earthly teachers of all kinds, because they have not acquired this ability, although it would be of great importance. But back to what the real issue was, the poisonous gases in the atmosphere, which are as unknown to terrestrial physics as the fact that they settle on everything material, just as they would have settled directly on the outer shell of our flying apparatus, could have endangered our health if we had come into contact with them, and so we eliminated them by radiating heat, and this radiation was also dangerous for all living beings. So my daughter Semjace was also not allowed to come into direct contact with the trees used for film and image work, which were then projected. Our technology in the flying apparatuses produced a thermal radiation, which acts in the same way as solar radiation on the surface of living things of every genus and species, but only more intense and therefore dangerous and destructive. As you know, when solar radiation is used as a starting point, insulation forms the flux that impinges on a part of objects and irradiates them.
Excuse me if I interrupt you, because if you are talking about objects now, then I think that you are probably not only talking about the flow of the incident natural solar radiation or solar radiation into the atmosphere and onto the surface of the sea and the surface of the earth, but also in relation to all of nature, its fauna and flora and all of the ecosystems and all of them material and living things in general in relation to direct radiation onto everything that arises in relation to a dependence on insulation, on solar radiation, right?
That is correct. What am I supposed to explain to you, Edward, when you already know it?
Sorry, I just wanted to make sure. Let's forget it then. But what is it about what I asked, about Hinwil?
As far as the film and the pictures outside Hinwil are concerned, the place and its surroundings are called Frogslexes, as my daughter mentioned. My daughter also projected the tree there, a large fir tree, from the surrounding forest onto the meadow, about 10 to 12 meters away from a building that is also shown in the film and the pictures in the background.
Fine, thanks. So then we have this. Unfortunately only a small piece of old film exists today. I don't have any film left at all, but what I do have is about 200 photos, because most of them have disappeared without a trace. Far more than 1,300. Among them were also the 36 slides of the Frogslexen. At every place where I had to take pictures, I always took the whole film, just their 36 slides. From various places where I had to make films and photos, various films and slides disappeared without trace from my office at Y. Haldenstrasse 10 in Hinwil during the first few days after work, before I was able to take them to Mr. Bear for development. How and who stole everything and made it disappear, I can only guess. More and more films and photos also disappeared in the course of time. Furthermore, my originals were, as Schmid, the photographer, emphasized again and again, falsified and hung up, and copies were made of them in collaboration and under control of men in black who were CIA people, while these people took my originals. As he said when I confronted him, the whole thing was supposedly done to give the impression that I was photographing suspended models. So a lot of my films and photos had been manipulated, which I only noticed a long time later, after he gave me back some of my material. The missing material was taken away by the CIA people, who also manipulated and falsified the aesthetic photograph. Over and over again he explained that these people had forced him to do everything and that he had to do it. Furthermore, he was afraid, as he complained again and again. Various of my films and photos were also handled by Martin Sorge, who had received them from because everything was stolen that was possible, which is why there was also a dispute with a neighbor over a stolen, very expensive finger ring, as well as police stories and trouble with the boss and a saleswoman at Migros, over stolen bacon. I also stole and sold my 8mm original films as well as copies, for Fr. 1000,000, as I only found out many years later from Michael Husserman, because he wanted to buy a copy of a film when he was still a teenager, but of course he couldn't afford it as a trainee, because where would he have got so much money from? And then there was to whom I gave all my films and slides for administration, but this person also stole like a magpie and sold my original slides and photo prints, thus amassing a small fortune, which was enough for him and his brother, who had the private pilot's license, to rent a twin-engined Piper Aztec, which I had previously rented myself from the small airport Lomas in the canton of Thurgau, where Bernadette, note, the name of the airport was not known to me, had been based. Where Bernadette, note, in her spare time, worked and where I also met her there, to help Bern, because the pilot sitting next to me allowed me to do so. The data of this machine are quite interesting, so I will look it up at Wikipedia and add it to my explanation.
Wikipedia, Piper Aztec, Piper PA-23 Aztec, Piper PA-23 250 Aztec C, type, business aircraft design country, United States.
Manufacturer, Piper Aircraft Corporation. First flight, October 1, 1958. Production time, 1959 to 1981. Number of pieces, 4,930.
The Piper Pennsylvania 23 Aztec is a twin-engine light aircraft of the U.S. aircraft manufacturer Piper Aircraft Corporation and the successor to the Piper Pennsylvania 23 Apache. The aircraft went into series production in 1959 and was built until early 1982. It has very good-natured, safe flight characteristics and requires only a short takeoff distance. The type was initially developed from a converted Pennsylvania 23 Apache under the designation Piper Pennsylvania 27 Aztec. In October 1957, Piper received approval from the U.S. Aviation Authority to rename the type Pennsylvania 23 to 250, allowing the existing type certification of the Apache to continue to be used. However, the Aztecs were produced with serial numbers starting with 27, instead of 23. Begin. In the USA, the pattern is also known as truck, because of the high possible payload and the rather low cruising speed of about 240 km per hour TAS. The aircraft is powered by two clockwise rotating six-cylinder boxer engines of type 0 to 540 and IO 540 with 186 kW each and offers a maximum of 5 passengers in addition to the pilot. It is equipped with a hydraulically retractable undercarriage. The landing flaps are also operated hydraulically. The first Aztec series, the Aztec A, still has the short nose of the Apache 235 without front luggage compartment. Only with the introduction of the B series was the fuselage nose lengthened to provide more luggage space. At the same time, the number of seats was increased from 5 to 6. With the introduction of the C series in 1964, gasoline injection engines were offered as standard. Turbochargers were available as an option. Radiator flaps were introduced on the engine nacelles. In the D, the on-death series, the instrument panel and the arrangement of the controls were then mainly ergonomically designed. For the in-death series, the fuselage nose was lengthened again. Piper Pennsylvania 23 Aztec. Usage. Among other things, the U.S. Navy bought 20 of these and used them as O1, from 1962, U-11. Until about the end of the 1980s, this type of aircraft was mainly used commercially by small airlines. Private operation was rather rare. Due to the high fuel costs, consumption approx. 111 gas per hour, and the high maintenance requirements, commercial operation is no longer profitable today. However, they are still used in the Caribbean because the aircraft have a high payload and high speed is not necessarily important there. There are currently 6 aircraft of this type still registered in Germany. Technical dated, Pennsylvania 23 to 250 Aztec C. Piper Aztec B. Parameter data. Crew 1. Passengers 5. Length 9. 51 meters. Wingspan 11. 3 meters. Height 3. 14 meters. Wing area 19. 3 meters 2. Empty weight 1,500 kilograms. Takeoff mass 2360 kilograms. Range 1900 kilometers. Service ceiling 6,100 meters. Maximum speed 340 kilometers per hour. Max rate of climb 460 meters/min. Engines 2 6-cylinder boxer engines like a Ming-IO 540C4B5, 250 HP each, 186 kW.
What came out of all this as a whole story was that about 2 years later the two brothers flew to Africa in the Congo with the rented plane and 1 or 2 passengers and spent 3 months on holiday there. When they came back, both of them were not with us in the figure for much longer, but dropped out. I had to be glad that I still got some of my film and photo material back. Just the 200 or so pictures I still have today.
Your statements are much more than I was aware of before, because my daughter Jace did not give me any information about them.
That is probably because you are individually responsible for your tasks and do not talk about your work among yourselves.
This is correct and was also the case with my father, so it is only now, while reading and looking up his annals, that I am learning what really happened and what has happened during the times of his work on Earth and with you. And in the process I also learn about events which he did not talk to you about, so that he also left you in the dark about various events, occurrences and all kinds of results. He also gave reasons for this, which I find understandable, but which are no longer relevant today. This for once, as he also advised you to keep silent about many facts, some of them even for your whole life, which you will undoubtedly keep. I know from the annals what it is about, which is why I do not want to talk about it now or later, because you know much more than just what my father wrote and what I am not supposed to know either, as a special note suggests. And as for your silence, which you learned from my father, I will say that it was good. For if you had not been silent and had not known certain of your knowledge.
All right, I don't want to talk about it. It is also not necessary, because I never broke my word that I gave to Sfirth, because I kept my mouth shut.
I know that, but it is written in my father's annals that you no longer have to keep your silence on certain matters, such as when people have died and are no longer exposed to any danger that could harm them in any way, such as serious punishment under civil or military law, but also danger to their lives, their work, their partnership, neighborhood or family peace, etc.
Yes, now that you mention it, but I simply completely forgot about it when I was a boy, because silence became a secular act or a uniqueness of something very extraordinary for me early on, which became a life behavior of honor and dignity for me, in relation to myself as well as in relation to every human being, all living things, the laws of nature, all ecosystems, nature and its fauna and flora, the universe as well as in relation to everything creative in general. This silence also taught me to think through everything and anything thoroughly, to judge, decide, determine and consequently act according to reason. And above all, it also prevented me from endlessly yapping a hole full of words and from endlessly babbling, self-referential and important, about something for which a few words would suffice. But the swashbucklers don't get it, and their gibberish only bores those who seem to be listening, who in reality don't listen, but very quickly lose interest in the babbling and lamenting of those who only superficially talk about it, and consequently nothing is learned or followed. It may well sound banal and stupid to many human beings that silence leads to a consequence of logical reasoning and thus to the construction and use of logical thoughts, but effectively this is formed from silence as a leaping fact, as an ability. And only this makes it possible to grasp profound thoughts, to sort them out, to build them up, and accordingly to carry out clear and logical reasoning, and only through this can logical knowledge be gained and correct decisions and resolutions be made, which are also acted upon and, as a rule, everything is done correctly.
And this corresponds to a teaching that already benefits us pleasure and through parental education. And as for your explanation, my father has made a special note in his notes, namely that he did not teach you this knowledge, but that you gained it yourself, and that you oriented yourself to it.
It just came about because I felt the need to live in honor and dignity from an early age and also to maintain honor and dignity in an appropriate manner towards everything and everyone. But I could only do this by keeping silent about many things, events, occurrences and situations, views, opinions and actions, etc. that came to me with and through other human beings, in addition to what Sfeth told me to keep silent.
All those who talk a lot would have to do this, because then also those who are addressed would become listeners, who would only be uninterested in hearing the speech of those who like to listen to themselves talk, but would hear those important facts which are not just said for the sake of unnecessary and banal speech.
You have great desires, my friend, which should reach the ears of those who talk a lot, but I think that if that happens, then still neither thought about nor action will be taken. But if it is taken up, then the action is taken once or twice at most, and then everything is forgotten, and consequently the old way of talking is continued, so that those who are not listening also continue to sleep inside themselves. Nothing is heard and also nothing is understood, nothing is learned and nothing is changed. But to philosophize about this is nonsensical, because what you mentioned about the fact that the silence no longer needs to be kept when there is no longer any danger for certain people, such as when they have died, is more important. You also said something that Sfeth did not tell me anything about, but which I should perhaps know today.
Yes, there are certain things you should know, but only that you know, without any special importance being attached to it, because for the most part they are facts that concern the past, but only few that concern the future.
Aha, but do you know, whether I still learn something from the past or not? It is not as if it is still relevant today, is it? But as far as things of the future are concerned, which your father Sfeth didn't tell me, if he fathomed them in the future, I know that he also didn't tell me some things about this, but maybe it would be good to know today. And as for old things, which I no longer need to keep quiet about, I don't know what would be important to talk about.
For you it would probably not be important, because you consider everything as over and forgotten, as you say often enough in our conversations. But the facts to be mentioned correspond to an importance as information, which should be mentioned and finally be disclosed to all persons informatively in order to clarify previously veiled connections, which are unavoidable for understanding the whole of our contacts and all persons involved.
Once again, aha, and what do you understand by veiled connections, my son?
Aha, then again my son, is also becoming rare. I would be honored if it were indeed so, but to your question, my father never told you that even before you were born. He contacted Father Rudolf Emanuel Zimmermann personally, instructed him in his flying apparatus for several hours about your mission and let him see the planet and also the whole Earth from the great height from the perspective of his flying apparatus. He pledged to remain silent for the rest of his life. as did all the others who were later initiated into your mission in the same way and were allowed to enter his flying apparatus once. All you know is that my father's faith had direct and unique personal contact with your first teacher, Karl Graf, at the beginning of your school days, and you attended classes 1 to 3 with him. He was the second person my father contacted regarding you. However, it also happened with teacher Gustav Lehmann, who, together with teacher Graf, corrected and edited your predictions without you knowing it, which were then sent out. However, you did not get to know teacher Lehmann in person until years later, when you completed the 4th to 6th grade with him, because teacher Graf often talked to you about your mission and you often brought up questions of a psychological nature which he could not answer. He sought the acquaintance of the pastor's son Professor Carl Gustav Jung, which Pastor Zimmermann arranged for him, also contacting him and initiating him into the whole of your mission. He also committed himself to a lifelong silence and supported teacher Graf with regard to your questions, which they discussed together, after which teacher Graf could answer them after days or weeks.
Well, I didn't know that, because your father's faith never told me anything about that, except that with teacher Graf. But I'm not really surprised about that, because I always knew that Sfirth didn't tell me everything, just as I adopted his way of doing things and therefore didn't tell him certain things, which he also knew. Either way, certain things were simply taboo, so we didn't talk about them.
This is in my father's annals, as well as other things about which you kept silent not only to me but also to my daughter Semjace. Asked also explained that you both behaved in the way she explained to me when I was with her and Semjace to inquire about what you were asking me questions about.
Yes, what? Did Askit actually complain to you that I also did not tell her everything?
No, there was no complaint, because she was talking about the usual way you know from our behavior and you also behave in the same way, during our conversation. However, it turned out that she mentioned Wendell Stevens and said that she also knew him personally. She did not want to go into further explanations, but referred me to you, which I also did, and you asked me to ask her again for the place and date of your first meeting with Wendell Stevens. Only a few days later did she tell me more about your and her first and further acquaintance with him. He was also strictly sworn to secrecy and was not allowed to talk to anyone about your early acquaintance. This was also not the case when the predetermined official path to official acquaintance with him via Lusenstag, Professor C.G. Jung was a distant uncle to her, had come about. Your much earlier acquaintance with Wendell Stevens, however, as Askit explained, had to remain as secret as her contact with him. He was under constant surveillance by the Secret Service and also had to answer questions on several occasions, but because he was silent and gave no information about what was suspected about him, false accusations were made against him, which he silently accepted and was therefore innocently sentenced to a longer prison term. Nevertheless, he continued to remain silent because otherwise he would have been accused of endangering the state and would have had to spend his last life as a prisoner. But now that he has gone, as Askit said when I asked her that she would probably not have to keep her silence anymore, she gave some dates where and when you first saw and met Wendell Stevens. According to her, that was in the United States of America on May 14, 1969. In an area called Casa Dobes, but where the three of you had been several times until 1975, in areas Askit called Sigro area, Javslina Rocks, Pine Top Lake and Gila Bend. Askit also told me that she had given Wendell Stevens the date and location of a forthcoming secret test flight concerning a secret new type of fighter aircraft, the F-117A. Which was to take place in June 1981, in an area called Groom Lake. He was tempted to use it to penetrate and hide in the area and then, when the test flight was made, to take a large number of photographs at the risk of his life. If he had been noticed by the many guards who were securing the whole area, he would have been shot immediately without a phone call, as Ascot said. And while I'm on the subject of taking pictures of a fighter plane, I would like to ask you what happened at the so-called Maywinkle, where similar pictures were also taken, when my daughter Semjace was followed by a Swiss Air Force fighter plane with her flying apparatus, which had a special purpose, as my daughter mentioned. But I am supposed to ask you about this, because you were responsible for a certain situation and incident at the time, but you are allowed to talk about it today, because the two persons involved in the matter are also deceased, as my daughter said, because she clarified this during her last visit to you on 4 September, because she knew from a future review that this matter would also be brought up.
Are all the secrets that I had to keep silent for so long to be revealed? This seems very strange to me, and I also wonder if it will be good.
What will happen has not been worked out by us, so a reaction can also be positive or negative, but it should not be taken into account, because the circumstances of the time require that these facts be known. This may have unpleasant consequences, as you rightly fear, but as always you will also be able to cope with them.
That's a great comfort, and a small stone falls directly from my heart, whereas the Himalayas hit me on the head, smashed my skull and rammed me into the ground, maybe just deep enough to land in hell. Either way, certain things were simply taboo, so we didn't talk about them.
This is also noted in my father's annals, as well as other things about which you kept silent not only to me, but also to my daughter Semjace. Ascot also explained that you both behaved in the way she explained to me when I was with her and Semjace to inquire about what you were asking me questions about. You are not a person of faith anyway, so it is not relevant from this point of view, because you are also used to let a thing, whatever it is, come to you and then dissect and deal with it.
Yes, but this is not exactly a comfort that could make me cheer. But when Semjace says that I should say what happened in the Maywinkle, then so be it, which will not be a joy to some people who were in Dubendorf at the time when the military airport. Well, it doesn't matter, then just what was then. One day an elderly man, whose name I will not mention in any case, no matter what happens, appeared to me and he declared that he and his colleague, a pilot of a Swiss Air Force flight squadron in Dubendorf, were convinced that I was really in contact with you Pledgerin. They would both know several of my photos and would also like to take some of their own. So he asked if I could arrange this. Of course I told him that I could not determine that, and whether Semjace would even consider it, which was very questionable, but I could ask anyway. So I did, and after a period of reflection she also said that this would be possible if I could judge the man as having integrity, which I did because I could check that he was telling the truth from his personal identity card and various supporting documents. So I telephoned him and explained to him that Semjace agreed. The man came back to me after my phone call, whereby he then also came out with the request and the question what he and his colleague really wanted, namely firstly, whether a certain day and time as well as a precise place could be fixed for it, because he and his colleague had something in mind which could be evidence for me. When he told me what he and his colleague had in mind to do with the project, I was left with no more spit. But then, when I was sure that the man, and of course his colleague as well, was serious about what he was proposing, I asked Semjace whether she would go along with it. She asked for 3 days to think it over, after which she said yes, and then it went ahead. And that was when the man, his name was by the way, he was 53 years old and appeared in his uniform while taking the photos, and I were able to take the photos in the Maywinkle. Unfortunately, the 8mm film I made and the whole slide film disappeared without a trace at my home, as did many other things. so that today there is only one photograph left, in which the beam ships of Semjace and the Swiss Air Force aircraft are shown together. As for the photos that the man took and what he and his colleague did with them, I don't know. Only once did I hear from them, about 14 days later, when the man telephoned me and explained that all his photographs had been well taken and that he would keep them safe. Until about the middle of this year 2020 I heard nothing more from these two, just from the man and his colleague, the pilot, until one day Michael V. said that he had been with Erwin Myrna and that the latter had told him that the pilot, who at that time was flying his fighter plane around Semjace's beam ships in Maywinkle, had been with Erwin and had confirmed the matter to him. Erwin had secretly recorded the conversation with a tape recorder after he had located the pilot who was flying the fighter plane at the time. Although I had recently been able to listen to part of his testimony when Michael received a copy of the recording from Erwin, the sound quality was very poor, so that hardly anything could be understood correctly. Whether Michael will then receive any more sound material, and whether Erwin will publish anything at all, is just as questionable as how long he will live. I mean, he is already 88 years old.
Considerable for an Earth human being. But as far as your explanation is concerned, you didn't really say what I wanted to know, because, as you sometimes say on certain occasions, you talked around the porridge of what is really important. And that, my friend, is something I know from our conversations when you don't want to talk about something, as you apparently do now, although I don't know why, because you speak only vaguely of the concept, but not of the broad outlines of what came to pass.
Well, you're right, but it is always the silence that I have to keep. And when I'm no longer bound by it, because for some reason it no longer has to be kept, then the inhibition comes automatically, and so I talk around the porridge. But well, the thing was this, the two of them, Mr. and the pilot agreed with each other, as I was told, according to a pre-arranged flight plan for a training flight which the pilot had to carry out, in which he would deviate for a short time from his actual flight area and turn up at the appointed time at the Maywinkle. Semjace was then to turn up with her beamed ships at the exact same time, and the pilot would then conduct a sham hunt with his fighter for a maximum of 2 minutes just to mislead any observers that there was an effective pursuit of a UFO. Furthermore, Mr. Hare said, contrary to the exercise plan, the whole thing would be carried out completely unofficially and would also not be officially recorded. What he also stipulated was that the exact effective date and time of the whole thing should not be given if I were to publish my photos, because that would be dangerous for him and the pilot. So he mentioned the date of 14.4/1976, which I should mention as the date my photos were taken, because that would not cause any problems for him and his colleague. When I reported everything about Mr. Semjace's request, she somehow enjoyed it and agreed to explore the place in Maywinkle from where he and I were to take the film and photo shots. She also said that I should explain to him, which of course I did, that he and his colleague could not be worried that their beam ships could not be observed by the population, because for our cameras, for us and for the pilot they would only open a viewing wedge, as she often did, so that the beam ships and at the same time everything could be seen, filmed and photographed in a completely normal way. But outside these two viewing wedges the beam ships were not visible. Semjace, as I said before, had already done this on other occasions. So the whole thing also went off without a hitch. After later exact clarifications by Semjace it turned out, however, that in the whole Maywinkle area the whole droning of the fighter plane was apparently only considered as a training flight of the Swiss Air Force, which actually nobody cared about, because such exercises were common in all areas at that time. So was then very eager and took his photos like crazy, while I let my film camera run and with my little Olympus who made slides. That's the whole story to say about the Maywinkle shots, my friend.
How do you sometimes say that in some ways you look up your father and your mother on the one hand, and I think my daughter looks up her grandfather on the other?
Well, you are a little different, but that is the way it is, and we say to each his own. But if you have no more questions...
No, because what I wanted to explain from my father's notes was detailed enough. If something else comes up, then I will ask for it again. But now, Edward, my friend, I still have some things that we have to talk about together, but which is not meant to be called up and written down by you, because the following